Thank you so much for joining us again. A stage full of design giants. We are really excited about this one. We want to quickly thank our event co-sponsors, Woodmeister and William Ravis, and our amazing panel sponsor, Nantucket Looms, and our media sponsor, Connecticut Cottages and Gardens, and our incredible moderator, fan favorite, Kelly Williams. And I'm going to hand it over to you to introduce the panelists.
Okay, well, thank you.
Looking forward to it.
Well, I rarely disagree with Marla, but as you guys know, I am not a design giant. I'm from the boring world of private equity, but I love design and had the great good fortune to be on the board of the New York School of Interior Design with my friend David Kleinberg. And but many of you know that I was part of the founders of Nantucket by Design, so I'm delighted that you're all here with us today. I wanted to say good on you for coming to the most important panel, but Martha's here in the front. So the second most important panel that you'll see during Nantucket by Design, I am joined by design giants, and I must say there's a misnomer of this panel. It says the legends of tomorrow, but I think these folks are the legends of today. The incredible Martin Brudnizki, Suzanne Tucker, and David Kleinberg. I feel so lucky to be on the stage with them today. So without further ado, I'm going to launch into our questions, which you'll see will have kind of a legend theme. And my first question, which I'll direct to David, is who are the art or design giants or legends who have inspired you in your career?
Lots, and probably very predictable ones. Luckily, I worked for one. I mean, Albert Hadley. Well, I worked for two. Albert Hadley and Sister Parish certainly were design giants. I mean, when I was a kid sort of sketching houses and thinking, I better not tell anyone I want to be a decorator. I used to look at the work of Albert Hadley, especially. And so certainly Albert Hadley. I scoured every Billy Baldwin book I could get my hands on, and still think of lots of references from the Baldwin books. But, and design giants, people today I look at, certainly people like Jacques Grange, whose work I think, spans so many idioms and design styles. Those have always been the people who I've looked at, people who can do lots of things. There's always that expression, jack of all trades and master of none. But some of people like Jacques and Albert, who could, do a Victorian room and a super modern room, I mean, to me, were masters of all. So those are some of them.
A great group. Suzanne, how about you?
Well, again, our early mentors, of which we were fortunate to have in life, I worked for the great Michael Taylor, which was quite an experience. There's the cleaned up version of that, and then there's the X-rated version. And
we want to hear the X-rated version.
I'd say from going back to when I lived in London for a few years, and I worked for one of John Fowler's last protégés, assistants, a man named Peter Hood, who's no longer with us. And I got immersed in all that wonderful, delicious, English country houseness and all those yummy colors and chintzes and, icky greens and all those great things. And so that really influenced me from the standpoint of, I think, furnishing a room, layering a room, certainly the classic, butter yellow Nancy Lancaster's room, that you can study over and over again as to how to place furniture, how to get more furniture in a room than you could possibly imagine. And then when I came to back to California and I went to work for Michael Taylor, completely opposite spectrum. He was considered the father of the California look, bringing everything inside. But his true genius, which most people didn't really see, was his mix of using antiques with more contemporary, and that whole blend and his sense of scale and proportion, that was his real genius. So that was the biggest influence for me. And I still will sometimes stand in a room and I'll kind of go, wonder what Michael would do. Okay, what would you do? But yeah, I was fortunate.
Martin, how about you?
Well, we're going to go to the beginning. It's actually my mother. My mother was very clever she still is, very clever in putting together rooms, and we always lived in very beautifully furnished apartments and houses. But not only did they look good, but it was how we lived in them. Even on a Wednesday night, you would lay the table perfectly. You know, it didn't matter who was coming for dinner, if it was just us. It's like the way of living, the way of sort of like enjoying it. It's not only that you're feeding yourself, you're feeding your soul, you're feeding your eyes.
Great answers. And I would say, you know, having looked at all of your work, what struck me is you each can do everything. And that, to me, you know, that speaks to the fact that you've had so many different influences, and you were just saying it, you know, kind of jack of all trades. I mean, having that versatility clearly comes through, I think, in your inspirations, because your eyes clearly appreciate all types of things. So I love those examples. Also, I love your example of Billy Baldwin, because as you know, he has an important history here on Nantucket.
Yeah.
He spent his retirement here and is a much beloved figure. I will tell you that one of my dearest friends knocked down that guest house that he lived in, not knowing how important it was.
Well,
but
both Billy and Albert managed to sort of live in their later years in the most kind of these wonderfully small edited spaces, you know, having lived a life surrounded by kind of what would be considered grandeur in any circumstance. But I love the fact that those two men, I met Billy in Palm Beach, where he was living in an efficiency hotel situation. All he wanted, and granted, he fit very nicely in that room. But, and I've never been so starstruck in my life, was to go and, you know, sort of walk into a room and be presented with Billy Baldwin. You know, I was just gobsmacked. I didn't know. I rarely don't know what to say, but I really didn't know what to say, except I offered to get him a drink at my friend's house, and he said, yes, I'd like a glass of beer, please. And I thought, oh, okay, fine, like a guy who drinks beer. And I went to the bar and got a beer glass and filled the glass with beer, and I handed it back to him, and I didn't realize at all that his tiny little hands could barely hold his beer glass. My sense of proportion wasn't quite right there.
well, I will recommend to you on the Nantucket Historical Association website, our dear friend Mary found an incredible interview with Billy Baldwin from his time here on the island, and I highly recommend. The other thing that strikes me is if you look at that interior of the house he lived in here, which was stark white, and you think about that beautiful kind of cola brown apartment he lived in, you know, again, that juxtaposition and the ability to live in very different ways shows the breadth of his genius. Now, as we talk about legends, we know a legend can be a person, like each of the people here and the people they've talked about, but it can also be a story. And I asked each of our panelists if they might share a particularly legendary story about a client or a project. It doesn't have to be the X-rated versions. It could also be just a story about the design industry, whatever you want to share. But maybe, Martin, I'll start with you.
Oh, gosh. I would hate to be indiscreet, so there are a lot of stories. No. I have a silly little story. When I was doing Soho Beach House in Miami, and I was traveling with Nick Jones, who is the founder and the creator, and a very clever, he's a genius beyond repair. And literally we arrived, we were staying at the Fontainebleau. And he checked in before me, and the receptionist behind the desk was very excited. He said, oh, Miss Jones, we have upgraded you to a suite. She was so excited to do this, and he just looked at her and said, oh, marvelous. I have 2 ugly rooms instead of 1.
Oh, God.
Suzanne, I feel like I want to save you for last because I have high hopes now for this story. So David, I'm going to come to you.
Gosh. You want a story or a legendary story about a client?
It could be a client, it could be a project, it could be someone you know in the industry.
I'll tell you one of the stories. So when I went to work at Parrish Hadley back in 1981, for some reason, I fully expected that I would kind of be taken under the wing of Albert Hadley, because that was where my aesthetic brain and heart lived. And instead, Mrs. Parrish decided Albert had had enough young men assistants. And so she decided that I would be sort of, kind of her second, which turned out to be an amazing experience and taught me so much more than I could have expected, because it really got me outside my box, but that was great. And Mrs. Parrish was incredibly prompt. If you were told to be at her apartment at 8 o'clock to go someplace, you turned up at 7:45, but she was already sat in the front seat of the car with Andrew, the Russian driver, so they could bicker all the way to wherever you were going, Connecticut or New Jersey. And Mrs. Parrish didn't like to waste a lot of time on things. And she had a great sense of humor, which nobody ever gives her credit for. And she also liked to drive herself. So sometimes she would tell Andrew, no, you don't have to come, and we'll drive. And then when she got a little bit older, she decided she didn't want to drive, but she would still tell Andrew not to drive, and I would drive. And so I would get behind the wheel of this green, big station wagon we had, and we would drive off to Far Hills, New Jersey, or Greenwich or Westport or something. And on the way back, Mrs. Parrish would sort of rustle around in her bag and come out with some tinfoil wrapped things. And she'd say, "You must be hungry now." And we went, "Yeah, I probably am a little hungry." And she would proceed to peel hard-boiled eggs.
Oh my.
And hand me an egg that had little pieces of red nail polish on it.
Oh no.
And I was, of course, too intimidated or too polite to refuse these sort of speckled eggs. And so I would eat one and then sort of look over thinking, well, there must be something to drink. But there never was.
Oh no. Oh my.
Oh, God.
Oh, there's I can imagine the smell in the car, just the whole atmosphere. Okay.
Oh, with 2 Pekingese, too.
We forgot the Pekingese. All right, Suzanne.
Okay, well, having worked for a legend, as you know, you get these stories, and we always said no one would believe this if we turned it into a sitcom. Half of it was all just too bizarre for words. But Michael Taylor had a good sense of humor, and he would choose between either the Porsche and drive like a bat out of hell, and you're sitting there holding on for dear life, or he would go for the Rolls Royce, and ditto, you're hanging on for dear life, but the Rolls drives like this, right? And so we're going down San Francisco, down Jackson Street, and client Dee Dee Wilsey comes walking out of her house, and he blasts the horn. And she looks over, and there's Michael in the Rolls Royce leaning out the window. "Hi, Dee Dee." And she walks over in the street, and, "Hi, Mikey." And she's like, "Nice car." And he goes, "Well, it ought to be. You paid for it." So, there's those stories. And then I'll tell you a client story that I had when installing a very large house, and long drawn out house, master suites all the way down at the end, his and her dressing rooms quite divided. And so, you get your team and you divide and conquer every place. So I had a couple of my young girls unpacking all the dressing rooms. And I always tell the clients, now, if there's anything you don't want us to touch or don't unpack, just, put it in a box, seal it up, and just say, "Do not open." So we're installing the house, and all of a sudden I hear screams from his dressing room. And we're like, what is going on? And we go down there, the clients weren't here. And they had opened a box they shouldn't have opened. And let's just say there were some rather large sex toys. And so I think those girls were scarred for life. But anyway, I just said, now, we're just going to close these up. Where's the masking tape? And shoved it in the back of the closet. So yeah, there's all sorts of things that happen.
Oh, I can imagine. Well, so along those lines, a legend is also a story that sometimes has a kernel of truth, but is not necessarily entirely true. So Are there myths about the design industry that you'd like to dispel, David?
Besides the fact that it's a glamorous life where you can earn a good living, let me see. I mean, actually, no, most people think, a decorator's life is, rather glamorous. We often go to beautiful places, but I remind people, I go to beautiful places, but off-season. I'm never there when you're supposed to be there. I'm there, when nobody else is there, because that's when you're allowed to do the construction and when all the things, and when the clients don't want to be there. The idea of sort of lovely lunches, I don't think I ever had that. Well, I've had some lovely lunches with clients, but the idea that it's that, and because that it's a kind of sybaritic life, and I think that's quite. It was far from the truth 30-odd years ago when I started, and it's even further from the truth now, when it's even more of a proper business. Mm-hmm. So maybe that's a myth.
I think it's a myth.
And that you can buy a Rolls Royce after being.
Exactly.
Suzanne, how about you?
Yeah, Michael died millions of dollars in debt, by the way. Yeah. Myths. Okay, there's a lot of myths. There's the glamorous myth, for sure. That's a myth. There's also the myth that you can do it quickly. That design on a dime thing and all those annoying TV shows that came out thinking that, oh, you can do this, overnight. No, good design takes tremendous amount of thought and attention, and you have to have the time. And it isn't even about the budget. It's about taking the time to be very conscious about what you do, very intentional about what you do. So the idea that, oh, you can do it quickly and throw it together, well, yeah, you can do that with dinner. I mean, you can do that with a party, but you're gonna dismantle the party, 2 days later. But you can't really do that with good design and good houses.
Martin?
Oh God, it's a tricky one, that. Perhaps I should turn the tables. Of course, maybe we're all on the inside. It's like, It's difficult to see the wood for the trees sometimes. So perhaps you should ask us, and we could say yes or no, or tell the story.
Pick a myth. Okay,
Yeah.
that'll be for the question and answer. Yes. You all pick a myth, and we'll see if we can dispel it.
Yeah.
So Suzanne, you have a great book called Rooms Remembered, and so in your mind, what do you think makes design enduring? Why are we still looking to the past? Why are we considering rooms from the past?
I think because good design endures. And so it will continually come back into the forefront. And I also think it's important to have the education in design and to reference back and to learn from those rooms, those houses, those designers, decorators. I think there's so much to be learned in why something was successful then and why it's still successful now. And to me, that is all about balance. It's not about style. I mean, it can be Louis Hooey Fooey, it doesn't matter about style. It can be pink, purple, or green, doesn't matter about color. It's all about balance. And the rooms that still today hold up, the reason they hold up is because they've got the right scale, the right proportion, the balance of furniture, the balance of patterns, the balance of color, all those things. It comes down to balance. That's what makes good rooms.
And do you think that it's about what you spend on the room?
No.
I mean, I
We all
feel
know
like
plenty
so
of
much of
people with bad
America
taste.
does not live in a good environment.
Yeah.
But it doesn't mean that you have to spend a ton of money, right? I think you're right. It's more about balance.
Yeah, it's definitely about balance, because you could spend, a bloody fortune and it comes out just awful. I mean, we all know there's plenty of people with a lot of money who have, really bad taste, and they continue to spend money on that really bad taste. Call us. But no, it isn't about that. And I think that's a myth, potentially, that people think, oh, you have to have a lot of money to decorate well. No, you have to, I think, instead develop a good eye and be selective, and don't fill an entire room with junk. Just wait and buy purposefully. Just take your time. there's nothing wrong with an empty wall until you find the right piece of art or can afford the piece of art that you want. That's doable.
Right. David, what do you think?
Well, I know I'm going to sound like an old fogey, but I don't think people look back enough, especially, okay, I'm really going to step in it, but with young designers, and I interview young designers to, come and work in the office or intern, and it's sometimes surprising to me how thin their references are in the history of decoration. And if you were going to an art school and they were teaching you how to paint a picture, you might want to be an abstract, you might be a minimalist painter, but you're still going to learn the rudiments. You're still going to look back at old master pictures. I always look back to go forward, I guess, is how I think about it. And so I always reference things to move, to leap off from them. And I think that's why we look at rooms. And I think it's important to look back. And obviously rooms that were done, 50 years ago, 100 years ago, 20 years ago, even, we lived in a different way. Families behaved in a different way. The way you interacted in a home was different. But the things that make those rooms, I think, meaningful, to Suzanne's point, balance certainly, but to me, it's curation. Again, curation sounds like a very highfalutin idea, but it just, to me, curation is, you've made a choice. I choose this chair, I choose that color. That to me is what curation is. So yes, leave a space blank until you find something that appeals to you, or leave it blank if the blank space gives you pleasure. So I think looking at those rooms, and I think we all have rooms we continue to look at, or they speak to us in a way. Sometimes that's just so visceral we can't even say why. Mm-hmm. But you look at something and you think, this is a space I could inhabit. What could make it more successful?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I always remember walking into the Frank Lloyd Wright room in the Met, and it's a visceral feeling. If you get it, you get it, but right. There's no one thing in that room that you're pointing to. It's just the experience of being in that room. Yeah, I agree. Mm-hmm. Martin, how about for you? What do you think makes a design enduring?
If it's a classic, it will always stay very current. Just what you said, you walk into that Frank Lloyd Wright room, and it's visceral. You can feel it, and it has nothing to do with time, nothing to do with age. And I agree with you, David. I always say that myself. I always look back to look forward. You have to do that. You need to understand the past, to understand the future. When Auden sort of said that the past is a foreign country. They do things differently there. And it's so true. And it's about to understand what is those things that they did differently, which is mainly about crafts and like how they sort of made things by hand. And today, it's sort of some of that is lost, which is a shame. And when you just try to make a bookcase or try to make something, and it's sort of like different companies look at it differently, and they can make it awful and some make it really well. It's all about crafts. Mm-hmm. Basically.
Yeah, that's come up on a number of the panels. That's really the craft, the handmade, often the sort of the regional things that that's a reference that you automatically make, your eye makes because of that.
Yeah, that's very true, actually.
So, what's a legendary room, Martin, that you keep coming back to? Mine, people have heard me say this before, for me it's the Agnelli apartment in Rome that Ward Bennett did, particularly that living room. I think about that room all the time. It influenced my own house. But is there a legendary room that you come back to?
Well, I have two, and they're close to me where I live in West Sussex. And it's there's a private library in Petworth House that Caroline and Max Egermont uses. No one can see it. It's not part of the National Trust part, and it's the most beautiful library. It's always been like that. It's never been touched. It has a Turner above the fireplace. It has some other most amazing art, just like precariously placed on tables, leaning on the bookcase, and it's sort of like, and it's just worth millions, and it's just treated like it's just things, and it's just an elegance to that. Another house is the Long Gallery at Parham, near Pulborough. And it's the most beautiful, long sort of gallery. It's a medieval building, and Oliver Messel painted the ceiling
Oh,
in the
really?
30s, and it's like it's been copied to death. But it's the original, and it's just so stunning, so beautiful.
Wow. Great examples. Suzanne, how about for you?
Oh, I can't pick one room, but I think what I would say are the spaces that for me have felt that transporting kind of experience. And it's interesting because maybe having grown up California and Santa Barbara, I experienced really beautiful houses and architecture as a child. And I was very influenced by what I saw there, of course, and grew up around, and the gardens particularly. So I'm very much about the indoor-outdoor. So when it comes to spaces, for example, like Isabella Gardner Museum, when you walk into that garden space, and especially when the nasturtiums are cascading, I'm sure you've all seen that, it's absolutely magical. But there is something with the sound of the water, the elements, there's that kind of transporting space for me is something I'll always go back to. And certain rooms in great houses, go to England and, yeah, I've been to that house many times before, but I'll go back again because I just want to stand in that great hall. Or, yeah, I have too many to pick one.
I agree. David?
I think we all have a lot of rooms, but I mean, two of mine might be floating around on this carousel. One was the living room of Henri Samuel in Paris.
Yes.
Yeah.
That is just a room, there. Well done, you.
Yeah, there it is.
I mean, to me, that room was it was transfixing. The combination of colors, the use of, very contemporary furniture, the classic background. I just thought everything about that room I just thought was genius. I just thought, when I first saw an image of that room, I thought, that's somebody I want to know. That made me interested in the room. The nice thing is that fantastic Balthus painting came to live in the living room of dear friends of mine in London, so I get to see it still, which is really lovely. And then the other room that I always, look back to what you were talking about, looking at things that make you think how to place furniture, back to Billy Baldwin, not to beat a dead Billy, but his little sort of studio apartment on 61st Street that he painted, shiny chocolate brown, and had, the Cole Porter bookcases, and his sitting area and his desk area and his sleeping area. And I used to study that room and think the layout, the geometry of what he managed to do in that space was so clever and so thoughtful. And so that's a room sometimes, I'll be sitting there with my tracing paper thinking, okay, well, there are too many doors in this room, or there are too many openings, or after we try, of course, we try to sort of fix things to the best of our ability, but then I'll think back and I'll think, okay, no, Baldwin managed to do this in that space, so get on with it.
I think that's such an important reference, because when you think of these voluminous houses that people build now, and often it's just two people or maybe one person living in them, and you think, do they ever even see each other? But then you realize how much life was lived in that studio apartment, and that, all of us know what you're talking about as soon as you reference it. So are there rooms of yours that you hope people reference?
Well, gosh, sure, I hope they are, but no idea if they will.
Him.
There were two rooms. There was an apartment I did on Madison Avenue in the 60s for clients when I left Parish Hadley, which was terrifying. And I went off to do my own thing. I worked with these clients who, this client, he showed up in my brand new office and handed me a check for $50,000, which you can imagine in 1997 was a lot of money to me. I didn't even have a checkbook for my office. And he said, I'll be your first client, and I don't want you to be late paying your vendors, because that means I'll be late getting my things. And that apartment was ultimately photographed in House and Garden. And a lot of people referred to it for many, many years. It was, I think, maybe because it spoke to a lot of the things I've been talking about, the combination of English things and textures, not so much textures used as pattern instead of pattern, a mixture of 18th century English and Art Deco and contemporary photography. And I think a lot of, that's one room people refer to on occasion, and I hope there'll be more. I don't know. As soon as I pop off, we'll see what happens.
Suzanne, how about for you?
Oh, goodness. It's funny what rooms we do or what houses that they come back to us oftentimes, and someone will say, oh, that room you did, 30 years ago. I have a powder room like that, and it was a big remodel of an apartment, and she wanted the powder room to be really special and unique, and I do love doing powder rooms. And I just couldn't come up with what I wanted. And then finally my assistant said, well, what do you want it to feel like when you walk in there? And I said, oh, I want it to feel like a wonderful English tortoiseshell tea caddy that you just step inside of and you're enveloped by. And so I did a tortoiseshell, faux tortoiseshell powder room. And it's been everywhere. Everyone sees it. People have copied it and knocked it off. And it's like, oh, yeah, that thing. And but the funny thing about it is that the client, she'll tell me, she said, well, there's only one problem with it. And I go, what? She said, everyone spends a lot of time in there. I'm like, okay. But other than that, I think to be remembered by a certain room, I think that's a tough one because, we're in the forest. It's hard to see our own things all the time. And because, like you said earlier, we do very diverse work. It's really about the people who live there. It's about our clients. And I mean, my own little mouse house in Santa Barbara, it's very peaceful and calm. It's all done in white canvas, touches of blue. It has a wonderful 18th century mirror, and it's just simple, and it's where I feel most peaceful. And it's not grand, but to me, it's memorable for me.
Martin, how about for you?
But most of the work that I do is hospitality. So it's sort of out there, and it sort of exists everywhere, with Instagram especially. So it literally is sort of, the work that I do is sort of washed. So, but I hope one day there will be certain rooms that will be remembered by, but mainly at the moment it's because of Annabelle's. And those sort of extravagant bathrooms that are sort of quite fantastical and just this great fantasy, basically. And I think it sort of appeals to people in this world of imagery.
It's wonderful.
So I want to go back to something Suzanne said before. Designing homes in particular is very personal. Do you have tips for clients to make the process as enjoyable and memorable for them as possible?
Well, I always say, if you're not having fun spending that much money, we're doing it all wrong. You should be having fun. And I think our jobs as professionals is that we should make it as pleasant as possible. Because especially if you're building or remodeling, it's fraught with headaches. It's 1,001 answers every month. So, I do think from the client standpoint, I think it's important to recognize the fact that I think clients have no idea how much we care. I really do. I think they know we want to do a good job. They know, we're on top of things. But I don't think they really know how much deeply we care about our work and the end result. And the real reward for a client, or at least from our standpoint for a client, is that they're happy in their homes. That's really what it is. And because, as I said earlier, it can be any style, but you want people to be happy. You want it to work for them. You want it to function well for them and their families, and that's their life. And hopefully we get invited back for a drink, right? But that's their life. So I'd always say to a client, the process can be fraught with headaches and hassles, and it will. But try to go with it. Try to trust the process. It will take longer than every contractor tells you. Sorry about the contractors in the room, but it will take longer. And yes, I think there's such a personal aspect of what we do that it should take the amount of time it takes.
Martin, how about you with clients? I know you're saying you're doing a lot of hospitality, but any client, like what's
Yeah.
going to make the project a better experience for them?
For me, interior design is all about telling a story. It's the storytelling, it's the narrative you put together. And I think that's what we do, what I try to do to sort of get the client on board, to get them excited about it. It's the sort of story, even before you look at a mood image of anything, a charity, you look at nothing, you talk about what it's about, what's the narrative, this space, this building, if it's a home, if it's a restaurant, if it's a hotel. That's sort of where I want to start, telling the story, almost like cinematic in a way. And then sort of hook them, because we love stories. I mean, we've been sitting here telling about the stories of our work and our lives. So it's like, it's so important. So you're trying to tell the story of their life or their new life. And that's what I always try to bring them along, get them excited before their attention span sort of they lose interest and there's something more important.
David, how about for you? What should a client be doing to make this experience more enjoyable?
Well, I agree with Suzanne. They should definitely be, try to relax and have fun. I mean, because it is an incredible privilege to build the things we get to build with our clients. So that's important. I think, they need to expect the unexpected. They need to trust their design team. Trust is super important. And I think that goes back to Suzanne's point about how much we care. I mean, the thought that goes into what we present to clients is takes a lot of time, and I think it's important that I make my clients know that they're being heard and listened to, and responded to, but hopefully in a way that I've filtered it through my Cuisinart of a brain and come back with something that. What Mrs. Vreeland used to say and Albert used to quote all the time, give them what they never knew they wanted. But,
Right.
So it's all of that. And hopefully at the end of it, we're invited back for a drink and maybe invited back to do another project.
So Suzanne, you referenced earlier about, clients who perhaps don't have the best taste or maybe things a little questionable. How do you deal with that? How do you Martha referenced someone yesterday who she said didn't have the greatest, how do you point them in the right direction and maybe counter their intention to go in a direction you don't think will serve them well?
Oof. That is challenging because obviously it takes a lot of diplomacy and tact. But I've fired a client before when I just realized I couldn't get them to see what it needed to be, and the color palette they wanted to use was really dreadful and dreary, and actually I just jettisoned a big project because actually it was a lesson for me. I won't tell you where it is, but it's not on Nantucket. Okay, it's not here. It's not here. But I absolutely was seduced by the architecture of the house. I fell in love with this house. Exquisite architecture, absolutely perfect. And for 9 months, I tried to work on this project and tried to steer away from black crushed velvet, which I don't think I've used since my 4th grade witch's costume. And I finally realized I kind of had a wake-up moment of like, I can't do this, and I don't want my name on it, and I don't want to be the one who ruins this house. So it started with this sort of seduction of the house, and I had to break up with the house. So yeah, it's a hard one. Taste is a tough one.
Yeah. David, how about you?
So I'm naive, thinking that everyone who appears in my office already has great taste.
Because they've chosen you.
Yeah, because they came. I just thought it was a foregone conclusion. Sometimes it's just about, broadening the choices for them. So say, you kind of try to respond a little bit to what they like. Sometimes it's showing them other examples that you hope will seduce them to, your point of view. Sometimes it's explaining why. I mean, oftentimes the way I do it is I simply explain why I think another choice is better. I've got a lot of language and I've read a lot of books, so I usually can intimidate somebody. And get them, because they can't argue back. I'm not going to talk economics with them because I'll lose, but I can talk about this. So, but sometimes I think if you explain, and clients have actually said to me, tell me why that's your choice. And because they do want to know, and they want to understand what was in my thinking when I made that choice. And I find that when I do explain it, in rational terms, and not in, well, this is good and that's bad, but in rational terms, I often find that they are understanding and very, willing to consider those options. So that's kind of how I try to do it.
And when you've won those arguments, do you ever get the comment back like, okay, we get you were right?
Yeah, sometimes, and oftentimes, I've had clients who said, you twisted my arm on this, but you were right, and I see that now in its entirety. Yes, yeah.
And you do that little like, yes, I told you.
Oh, I do everything I can not to rub their nose in it.
Martin, how about you?
I mean, I sort of agree with David. You have to sort of have great skills of persuasion. That's sort of what it's about. I mean, I think the challenge is mainly if you're working with a husband and wife, and their own individual styles are so far away, and you suddenly become this sort of marriage counselor.
Yes.
And I think that's a bigger challenge, because I think we can always talk to the choices we make and why we made these choices to them. I mean, in your case, like the black crushed velvet, I mean, it's like, gosh.
No.
And I mean, it's like, as I tried to as well in the beginning, before we take on a job, sort of figure out, especially with private clients, who are they, and do we get on, and do you like what we do? Is there are we simpatico here? Because if we are not, I just no, I just can't, as we say.
So, Martin, I have a question. I want to start with you, because you have worked on a number of kind of legendary, iconic properties, most recently the Splendido for Belmont. When you take on the redesign or refresh of a legendary property, how do you approach that? Because those places, have a real meaning to the people who have been going there for years. And so how do you approach a project like that?
Well, if you use Splendido as an example, it's quite an interesting example. So when I was taken on for this project, Belmont had just been bought by LVMH. And Bernard Arnault had two hotels in Belmont's portfolio that are his favorites. One was Splendido in Portofino, the other one was Cipriani in Venice. And the reason he loved Splendido in Portofino was the tennis court. Because the situation of this tennis court is the best tennis court in Europe, because you're overlooking the Bay of Portofino. So when he came to this hotel, and the CEO at the time of Belmont sort of said to him, why do you like Splendido? He said, why do you like it? He said, I love it so much. It's the best hotel, in northern Italy. Oh, wonderful. Which room? Room? It's the tennis court. Anyway, that's a side story. So what we then sort of did, so we started sort of trying to put together this narrative and this story, and we were working with Belmont sort of more directly. And these sort of hotel groups, I call them their accountants, they're bean counters, and they don't really understand, because what we do when we start the project, we look at the history of the property, we look at the area, we try to understand what is Ligurian style. And then we did an enormous amount of research into the northern Italy materiality and finishes. And what we then learned to find out, in Italy, you might say, oh, terrazzo floor is Italian. No, but it's different in different parts of Italy. Terrazzo in Venice looks different than in northern Italy, where it's called graniglia, because you mix the mosaic into it. So there's already small little nuances that are sort of quite important. So we did an enormous amount of research and we showed all of that to Belmont and they rejected everything. They just wanted it to be this sort of basic thing. And Bernard Arnault sort of got wind of this. So he put this incredibly clever man called Silvio Orsino, who created the Bulgari Hotels, to become creative director of all the sort of Belmont hotels in Italy. And we then showed him all of this, and he was like, this is amazing, put something together. So then that was sort of like, we were sort of really doing the right thing, and to really look into what is the history, what's this about, and try to use makers that are local, that the headboard fabric is made like 20 minutes away. This Lampasso beautiful woven fabric is 20 minutes away from Portofino. So everything is incredibly local, so we use lace, we use painted furniture, etc., etc. So, and that's what you do. You basically, that's what we do. We research the area, research craft, but then we try to do it differently. So we put things like, for instance, there's a lot of local caning, and instead of like using cane chairs, we sort of do it on the bedside table, for instance. So we try to do it in different places. And like one battle that I had, they wanted to do marble countertops in the bathroom, the vanity units. And I said, absolutely not, it has to be terrazzo. And they were like, oh, not sure about that. But then we did the model room, and there it was. And it looked so special and so different, because that's what they wanted. They wanted something different.
So you're referring to something familiar, but you're using it in a different way. So for people who love that interior, it's still going to make sense to them.
Exactly, but still we were sort of looking at where things were, like the ground floor, the entrance as this black and white floor. It's sort of famous regional black and white floor, but the problem with it was that the skirting architraves were black. It's not very much like a summer residence, it's like black. Yeah. So I said we have to take it all off, take it all up, and sort of swap it so that skirtings and architraves were in Carrara marble. So in sort of changing it around, and that suddenly it looks fresher. Right. No one can tell. No one can sort of, they said, oh, it looks so much fresher, but they can't tell why.
Yeah. So Suzanne, how about for you? Because you've done this as well with other legendary properties, right?
Well, speaking to the hospitality, the only hotel I do is the Auberge du Soleil in Napa. And of course, I was Michael Taylor's assistant, scrambling behind when he was doing it. And so it's sort of like Groundhog Day for me. It's like never ending, and we just do the rooms over and over. But again, standing in a property that you know you're going to be criticized for changing the slightest thing, and everyone's going to have an opinion, and you can't let that get into your skin. But you also have to, I think, honor the history of a place. And one of the things that I always do in terms of color palettes, especially at the Auberge in the Napa Valley, I go out and I'll take the bark off of the oak tree and the underside of the olive leaf and the dirt, the ground, literally the earth, and I'll start to look at the palette that it is inherent that you're going to be seeing when you're staying there and looking out to the view and so forth. And I'll start to spin a color palette of textiles off of that. And then textures, of course, so important. But we completely did something very dramatic recently at the Auberge where the bar, I don't know why it was built the way it was to begin with, but every time I walked in, I thought, why did they put the wall where the view is? So finally I had the reins and I said, can we please flip the bar? Open up all those windows, put the bar over here. And it has transformed that space. Yeah. And a lot of the people who've been coming there for 40 years didn't know what was different. They just thought it was the color of the furniture was changed. And I was like, yes, that was good. So.
Success. Yeah, David, how about for you?
Probably one of the most sort of legendary houses we worked on that just comes to mind is the Villa Artemis in Palm Beach, which is that great house that was owned by C.Z. Guest's family, her father, with that fantastic, classical temple at the end of the swimming pool and the famous, Slim Aaron's photograph of C.Z. Guest at the pool. And my clients had owned the house for a long time, and then they were going to add a little guest house to it. And so the house was due for a major renovation, upgrading all the mechanical systems, all of that. And so it was interesting that the interiors of the house were not what people really remembered or had known, but the exterior of the house was sacrosanct. And everyone was like, oh, you're working on that house, but you're not going to touch it, and nothing's going to happen. And so I worked with Ferguson Shamamian, the architects on the house. And so we were very careful in not mucking around with the exterior of the house. But the interiors were completely new and very fresh and young and kind of more modern fabrics and kind of much more relaxed than it was his parents who had owned the house. And so, but when it came to two things, we weren't going to touch them. The color of the shutters on the house and the door was this very particular turquoise color, which of course had faded and faded and faded over the years. So we did do our research to sort of scrape away and try to get back to the original turquoise, which of course was stronger. And at first everyone went, oh, but then, no, that's the right color. And then of course the pool furniture and everything at the pool cabana, we tried very hard to kind of not recreate it, but it was absolutely the DNA of the house and the spirit of those pictures. And we restored the griffins that had been painted black on the pedestals at the pool, and restored the temple and Diana in it, and everything got restored. So it just was, it had its proper facelift, but looked like the house. So I suppose that's how we really treated it, to respect it. It's a glorious house. Why fix what's not broken?
It is a glorious house, and as you know, people have been hovering around it trying to buy it, but we have our fingers crossed that won't happen. I have more questions, but you guys are so lucky to have these legends on the stage, so I do want to give you a chance to ask your questions. If you would raise your hand, and we will bring you a microphone so that everyone can hear you. And we have a question right up here, Mary.
Hi there. Oh, is that working? Okay. So you all talked about how you all started off working with these legends that helped mold you. And then David, you said something along the lines of new designers, maybe like young designers coming in working for you, and there are a lot of gaps to be filled. And so like the history of design and whatnot. And so it kind of falls on all of you to sort of to act as more of a mentor, to be a bit of a teacher as well. And so, these designers themselves may be, legends in the future. And you're sitting here saying, well, I learned this from so-and-so. And so what do you hope that they'll say that they learned from you? And how are you maybe actively going about instilling these techniques or, whatever, with these young designers that come to you?
I mean, when I left Parrish Hadley in 90, I started in 81, I left in 97. And it was terrifying to me because I had always been able to sit across the desk from Albert Hadley, who I revered. And anything you'll ever hear about Albert Hadley, you will always be told he was one of the most generous, kindest men in life and in the industry. And when I left, I vowed to myself, the only person I can't lie to, that I would try to be as generous with my time and whatever little I knew, mostly I had learned from him, with the people who came to work for me. Because I agree with you completely, and I think all of us would. I sit here because people have been incredibly generous with their time and their knowledge. Designers, tradespeople, craftspeople, antique dealers, people who would sit with me and not, turn their backs on me because I didn't know anything, but would explain things to me, whether it was about a ceramic or a piece of furniture or how to sew a curtain heading. And so I think I take it very seriously, and it's incredibly meaningful to me, both in the people who've come to work for me and have moved on to their own careers, and interns I'm on the board with Kelly on a school, the New York School of Interior Design. Not having gone to a design school myself, don't tell anyone that. I take it all, it's incredibly important to me, and I think we'd all agree, hugely gratifying.
Mm-hmm. Anyone want to add anything to that, or we'll take another question? Do we have another question? I have another question. Oh, we do have one.
David, would you enlighten us, and you probably know the truth, about why Jackie Kennedy and Sister Parrish parted ways?
Ooh.
Everyone sits up.
Oh, yeah.
It's actually one of the things I'm not old enough to say I had been there. I did work with Caroline Kennedy for a while, which was a very interesting experience. I won't go into that, but it was an interesting experience, and she's a remarkable woman. I actually don't know the answer. I only know the legendary story of Mrs. Parrish reprimanding the children, but I have no idea if that was the case or not. Sorry to disappoint.
Oh, we have another question up here.
I was wondering if you have kind of I hate to say a go-to, but a signature element, or I don't know, that you rely on, often. Not that you're repeating, but I don't know, just a certain drapery design that you find you use a lot, or whatever, some kind of art. Anyway, just if you have kind of a signature design aspect.
You?
I try to mix it up. I think we have an approach architecturally, how I like to deal with breaking up walls in sort of the detailing of walls in a room. I have an approach that's quite linear. So the detailing of finishes becomes easier to install. That's my approach, but that's something that gets hidden once you apply things to it. But I like to mix things up. I don't like to do the same curtains, the same furniture all the time, because it's just boring for me. Not very exciting for me.
Yeah. Having worked for Michael Taylor, he had a very signature look. It was on the cover of all the magazines. It sold the magazines. It made the phone ring. It paid the bills. I vowed I never wanted to have a signature look because I got bored with what he'd say, oh, let's do this. And I'd say, Michael, we did that for the last 3 houses, and it was just boring. So it's probably far more lucrative to have a signature look that you can just do over and over again. But I'm a more personal approach to my work.
And I worked as well for a designer many years ago who shall not be mentioned name, but he had like 4 trays, and in there were like the samples perfectly placed out, and that's what you used.
Oh.
And that was it, 4 trays.
Was it?
Yeah.
Oh my
Sounds like heaven.
Exactly.
I mean,
Simple life.
there are things. I mean, I have my preferences. I'm not sure I'd say they're my go-tos, but there's a certain type of woven silk that Larson has done for years. I like it in all its colorways, so I use it because I like it. I tend to like, a linen damask more than a silk damask. I tend to like wool satins more than, so I have things I like. I'm not sure, so I'd say they're preferences more than go-tos.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, and I think, and I do tend to employ them or find, in things throughout. But like Suzanne, I stupidly haven't developed a signature look, but maybe there's still time.
Well, there's always shiplap and sliding barn doors.
Exactly.
We can take one more question in the middle there.
Okay.
this on. Yes, I do. Okay, great. When you meet with a client, do you typically take the approach of, here are a bunch of projects that I have done, what drew you to me? Or do you speak with them about other designers? Do you reference other projects, or do you reference the designers from the past and just say, like, what are you looking for in your current designs? But like referencing your own work is, I guess, is the question.
I'll answer that. Yes, I mean, generally people, come to me at a certain point, they know my work already. Although I had a very funny experience not long ago where some people I'd known for years, but her husband never knew who I was or what I did or anything. It's okay, fine. And so she wanted me to come over and talk about the house, and he came in and he sat down and he started saying, so, how long have you been in this business? And I looked at him and I said, oh, are you actually interviewing me? I'm like, okay, let's do it. Interview. And it was really hysterical because I hadn't been interviewed like that in, an awfully long time. So a client comes to you and, they obviously have an idea either stylistically of a house that they want to build or that they've bought or that sort of thing. But I always tell every client all my work that they could flip through for hours, they're not going to see their house in there. I haven't done it yet. That's a personal approach. So don't know if that helped you or not. Yeah.
Okay, well, I am very confident that much like the discussion we've had here today, you're going to reference this panel. You're going to remember the things you heard and the images you saw, because we have had a conversation with 3 extraordinary people. So please join me in thanking them.
Thank you. Well done. Well done.
Well, thank you to Kelly and all of our panelists. We'd now like to invite you to the lobby where Martin and David have books that you can buy, and they will happily autograph.
Great.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Good.